Hi everyone, I'm really pleased to be here and I want to thank you. I really mean it. And I'm going to talk about the House Studio Gallery, an ongoing project that I'm currently running in London. And msdm, it's an acronym, stands for Mobile Strategies of Display and Mediation, and this is for me a way of dealing with more as a platform for collaborative work. So you will see that most of my work comes under this acronym. And I want to say that my contribution to this conference and exhibition is through a selection of publications that are all related to this particular site, the House Studio Gallery. And you will find in the exhibition a version of this initial proposal. And I want to start with one of my first publications as msdm, and I published an emergency biscuit that came within a guide for emergency operations to deal with starvation and the hunger crisis. And this was a commission for a site-specific work in relation to a vacant factory, and this concern, you could even call preoccupation with vacant spaces, came to dominate my practice in the long run, as you will see. And here it's also something that became a constant in terms of my publishing practice, which is the publication becoming the artwork or the exhibition itself. So in this case, what was being created was this emergency biscuit and the guide, and this is what was being shown in the context of the gallery that was set up as a fictional engagement with a platform for rescue of international hunger. As part of the guide, there was all this research about the peculiarities of this particular space that was vacant, and I worked with the former workers of the factory to create a symbol for an area that was going regeneration, which is a fancy term for gentrification. So it was a lot about giving a voice to people that were being displaced by a process of uneven development. So I worked with them and we collaborate in the creation of this artwork in the form of a multiple that brought within itself the conditions of its own distribution, in the sense that was freely available and distributed in the urban environment. This was 2004. 2015, we were in the middle of a terrible crisis in London, where all the studio spaces were being converted into condos and luxury apartments, and I was part of an artist co-op. We had our own artist studios. We lost 2 buildings to this process of development, and I started to look into what were other possibilities to create a feasible live-work space. And I was looking at vacant factories, offices, and I came across this site, that 3-acre site in Whitechapel, the center of gentrification of East London, available for 40 million. And I could have gone and worked on the stock market or financial district and tried to get the money available to get it, but I decided to just let it get bought by a housing association that invested 40 million in this particular site. And whilst the planning application went through a process of approval, I became the the caretaker for the property, which gave me access to a multi-million property in a very, very vast field of possibilities for me. So at that time, I started, without even naming it that way, this House Studio Gallery, because it was, for me, a way of creating a live-work exhibit situation And the site you saw before, the facade of this particular factory, which actually it was a factory that then became a self-storage facility, became the cover of the first book I did in response to these sites that I've been reusing. The unit I was using within this massive warehouse was previously used by stock traders live. They were, and the unit where I lived was used for analysis of coffee and cocoa beans. So a very peculiar site where I could research traces of the former uses of the building, and that became, part of the work itself. So this is a view of the corridor that would go into the galleries and to different rooms. But all this was so massive that the corridor itself just looks like a loft, that I could use. And here you can see that these divisions between live and work become imperceptible just because of the daily living. And also, the exhibition spaces being massive, all these archives of things I was finding on site, they could be displayed. And so there is a combination of found materials and photographic display, publications. And of course, in terms of references, people like Mas Yunus, one of, artists or people associated with Fluxus movement. One of his interesting projects, maybe less known, for a co-op for artists. Or in terms of more feminist spaces, you could think about the Woman's House by Judy Chicago and Miriam Shapiro with their students, also as another reference in terms of female feminist subjectivity. 2 years later, I moved to another site, because that's the fate of these buildings, is that they're temporary. So one has to keep moving from one to the next. This one was by the Bow Creek in Tower Hamlets as well. And again, a very different space. Here more self-contained, without walls, just one single unit and a former printer's facility. And I use it in a very different way. And then eventually I moved to the third space that was a historical house in East Croydon, South London as well. And here, it was all about other affordances provided by the buildings themselves, that due to their singular architectural features, this one having been an electricity showroom as well as the UK border agency, I found traces of the past lives of these buildings, from photographs to objects that again became part of publications and projects that you will see. In the meantime, I lost my family. Both my parents passed, and with the loss of another building, I had a total emotional breakdown, and that led me to taking a year off just to rethink this whole process and rebuild my capacity to respond to this situation of finding myself living in London with so many obstacles to creatives, to create spaces to create and to live. And that led me eventually to a breakthrough, like it happens always with the hero's journey. So it's kind of that narrative, you go down to come up, and in that process I was able to redefine my place in this cycle of urban redevelopment of which I had become part of, and through several diagrams that helped me to map out these possibilities and visualize possible manifestations for this project of mine, I started mapping concepts like, serial use of vacant buildings, very important strand in this project. And another one, this other concept of artist museum, And this in context of other things like an archaeology of everyday that I'm doing, also in being so much of auto-ethnographic practice when I'm showing my way of life, and all this connected to an experience of self-publishing and making my life and my way of doing work visible through publications and printed matter. So in terms of this serial use of vacant buildings, I started internalizing this notion of making use of the potential of vacant buildings, which is a very ecological perspective and very based on new materialisms as well. If we want to look at the built environment as made of affordances and providing to us creatives and humans things that we need, and they're already available in the living environment. So no need for more construction, no more colonizations through skyscrapers and condos. The opposite, use existent buildings, including all the vacant buildings that are available, million office spaces and factory spaces, industrial warehouses that are already available, and use that as part of our creative process. Of course, this is very much part of, it has to be integrated in a conversation with developers. So I'm doing it another way. I'm doing it through an artistic process. And, this concept of affordances has to do with bringing into each one of the projects things that are unique to each building. And for example, this last building where I am right now, which is a 3-story building that used to be part of the military complex in Woolwich. It's right across this military dome. And, part of my everyday is just to make use of things that are around me. So let's say, for example, where you see that the main road, the London Marathon runs through that every year. So one of the projects that came out, one of the publications, is made by sourcing t-shirts from the runners that they left on their way. While they were running, they get overheated, they throw away their clothing, and I collected these, and this is incorporated after being washed, of course. It's incorporated into wearable zines that the published part contains research about the military dome, the way these military domes are being converted into museums, so using somehow a counterpoint to the artist museum, the institutional museum that is an event of the urban space. And this is one of the wearable zines in the series that is available downstairs. Another way of working with the building and the affordances of old buildings is this one called Studio Archaeology that I developed in collaboration with University of West of England, where the whole group of teachers and students, they came to the building and everything was mapped through photogrammetry, and parts of the house like bedrooms or specific galleries were put online as 3D models, and the book that contains these 3D models is available downstairs. Just to give you an example of how things work in terms of form. How much time I have? Oh, okay, it's going really quick. So 3D buildings of parts of the building that are available online to navigate. Other things that are done in response to the building and this condition of mobility is a set of cards that is available downstairs as well. And you can use them to deal with, let's say, specific situations that require a mobile strategy. Newspapers also dealing with this particular building, and this one from a queer perspective, looking at vacant space from a queer perspective. Let's say, like Karen Barad would say, water has a queer molecule. You could think of the vacant building also having a queer architectural feature. So playing with that to deal with identity, and here faces of my collaborators in this process, they were processed through AI and new filters in Photoshop, that are used for surveillance. And the latest publication, Liquid Memories, where the whole theme of mobility has been explored through in a publication format that not only deals with a particular, departs or starts with a particular river in Portugal, the Douro River. It was a site-specific commission, and then deals with the water infrastructure, and then goes into the figurations of water itself as part of the aesthetics of the artist book or the photo book. So looking at books that are mobile or loose or fluid. And associated with this project and connecting with the library of the House Studio Gallery is this particular subsection of the library called the Water in the Library. And these are books that I've been acquiring and I'm still purchasing and acquiring if anyone has ideas or publications to contribute. And all this is specialized in fluid publishing. So publications dealing with mobility or that are analogize mobility in their formal characteristics. Downstairs you'll find as well this video essay. Actually it's a textual essay or photo essay that comes out of a video essay that a curator came to do as a residency at the House Studio Gallery, looking at this model of working from the perspective of the Artist Museum. And some of the references, of course, and I choose here only two because these two have to do with specific buildings, are Marcel Brothers, the Museum of Modern Art specifically.
Fusion power has a certain reputation, something in the realm of a holy grail, but not in a good way.
There is a famous joke about nuclear fusion, about how it never becomes a reality. You can Google it if you like. But really, the moment...
Yeah, that was interesting. Okay, Marcel Brothers. I was going to show some samples of the video where we look at these examples, interspersing images of the House Studio Gallery, specific installations with video from these works. But, you know, Marcel Brothers, most of people think about his artistic museum as a fictional museum, but more relevant for me is that he started this project in his studio and house where he lived, and then eventually it became mobile and it went into interface into several institutions. And another one is Dieter Roth, the Mold Museum. This one is particularly relevant for the building where I am right now because of the structures of the wall that are in decay in certain of the floors, and also this idea of curating the detritus of everyday life. And so I want to create a challenge for everyone here is that, you know, this image that I first submitted for the catalog as a preview of the installation that I would be doing here is different from the one that is downstairs now. If you can spot the differences and tell us, you can get one of these particular photo books that were published specifically for this exhibition. You just need to tell us what you think the differences are, and whoever gets more differences, spots more differences, gets the books, and we have 10 books to give away. So, are you telling me it's over?
1 minute.
Okay. I could maybe just point you in direction of this video, the museography of the artist studio, and who knows, maybe we can still see a few minutes of it.
1 minute.
Okay. So I'll go straight to this particular section that is more relevant to us here.
Blackchapel's total autonomy over the way the work is exhibited, communicated and preserved, 3 activities that are part of the museographic process, relies on the framework provided by House Studio Gallery that presents itself as a total environment. This musealization of the House Studio Gallery can be contextualized by the critique of the contemporary art museum and its functions that emerged in the 1960s, when artists started to appropriate museological structures the collection, the catalogue, the inventory, and the exhibition as artistic poetics. Artist museum models and fictions include the Mold Museum by Dieter Roth, Mouse Museum by Klaus Oldenburg, and the Museum of Modern Art, Department of Eagles by Marcel Broters. By museographing their studios and practice, artists give their work the institutional, museal status, and transform their production into musealia, that is, in a museum object that integrates the museological field. This allows them to dispense with the institutional art circuit, escape the mercantilist logic of the art market, and gain control over the conditions of production and exhibition of their work. We witness, therefore, in the House Studio Gallery, another type of space that presents itself as a virtual museum, or potential museum, which exists in essence, but not in fact, a museal experience at the margins of the institutional reality. It is undoubtedly in this typology of artist museum that the immersive dispositives of collection, research and display result in an expanded practice of the artist's book.
Yeah, this concludes it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you just...
Yeah, will you do that?
Yep.
Thank you.
Good.